My name is Ben, and normally I'm a C# developer, C# / JavaScript, full stack web developer. And I figured out that maybe it's time to learn something else. I gave few languages a try, mainly Go. Initially it was pretty fun, but then it just started to be really boring. So I figured maybe I'll try Nim. I heard few good words about it. And the main things that I'm looking for in a programming language right now is that, maybe I'll write it down in here. But first of all, goals for a programming language, at the moment, of course, are, first of all, I wanted to have static types. That's something I'm looking for. That's something I personally like to work with. So that's one of my first requirements. The other requirements is that I want it to be a compiled language. And as compiled language, I don't mean something like C# where we compile it to an intermediate language, just like it's with JavaScript or Python. I mean with Java or with Python. What I mean is that it compiles straight to an executable. And that's something really important to me because, I'm proficient with C#. It's really good when it comes to large applications, something enterprise. It's pretty fast and it's feature rich. I like it. On the other hand, we have JavaScript, which I enjoyed as well. It has good features, especially when you start going to TypeScript land. But just the fact that I can't have an executable, I mean, in theory, with C# now you can have an executable. With JavaScript, if you create a program with bun, you can compile it to an executable. But the thing is that it's being shipped with its own runtime. So your code is basically, instead of being, 150 kilobytes, it's suddenly 20 megabytes, 50 megabytes, 200 megabytes. Depending if you have a lot of dependencies, then it might grow that large. And because of that, it's just, I don't know, not good for my use case. I have like my own home server running a Nomad cluster made of 3 ragtag servers. And because of that, I want to be able to deploy my own applications on that, but I have limited RAM. So it would be nice if my application use as little RAM as possible. If I'll run it with C#, I will be using a lot of RAM. If I'll run it with JavaScript, I'll use even more RAM, just because the application is sitting there while doing nothing. So basically, I'm looking for a way to have the smallest possible Docker container. And yeah, that's my goal. So I want the language to be compiled and require no runtime. So no VMs, no things like that. And the other thing is that I want the language to be relatively simple to use. Because first thing is that, you want I don't want, for example, to deal with something like Rust, where suddenly have really high learning curve. And as far as I tried Rust a few times before, but it was just painful. It wasn't something I enjoyed. I'm looking for a language that is relatively simple to use, that's why my first try was to, hey, how about Go? I heard that Go is really simple. And indeed, I was able to pick it up in a weekend and start actually coding some libraries and, testing it out. It was nice and fast. Tooling is amazing. But I'm a kind of programmer that likes to use some features. I don't like when I'm always forced to write for loops, or where, it's just a lot of things that I'm used to with using a language like C# is suddenly more difficult. Maybe not difficult, it's just you need to do a lot of steps to just do this single thing. And I don't like that. Just the fact there's no ternary expression, that was a, kind of turn off for me. So, yep, that's something I didn't like. But then what? What else am I looking for? So I'm basically, static typing, compile language, no runtime, relatively simple to use. And the other thing that I'm looking for is basically some functional programming features. So by that, I mean very simple things. Just being able to have equivalent of map and reduce in JavaScript, or filter, and just ability to write functions like that, so that, I can go through a lot of data quickly without basically writing any for loops by myself. I find that kind of code is easy to read, easy to write, and easy to modify too, because you can easily add or remove some steps in between. And I like that kind of style programming. And of course, on C# side, I'm used to things like LINQ, where I have a lot of options to how I can process data. Another thing that I'm always, at least right now, I'm looking for in language is good generics. That was one of my biggest disappointments in Go. I'm somebody that's used to generics. I just use it a lot. I know that's my preference. And I was lucky enough that when I was learning Go, generics was, introduced shortly before that. But oh my, it's limited there. It's coming from C# and TypeScript. It was painful. So that's something I didn't really like, and that's why I'm not continuing with Go right now. So basically, all those requirements. Let's also say that some metaprogramming would be nice, because why not automate some things? In C#, for example, it can do a lot of stuff through reflection, where you can automatically find types and register things automatically. You can do the magic stuff, things that Go is trying to avoid as much as possible. You can do also a lot of magical stuff in JavaScript. And yeah, basically all that led me to the NIM language. So I believe I should be able to go here. NIM programming language. And that's what I found. So I haven't programmed anything in NIM yet. I skimmed through some tutorials just to have an idea of what is available in a language. And so far I really liked it. And before going into actual learning and seeing, seeing how it's being used, maybe I'll say what is my end goal here. Because, it's one thing like, oh, I'm going to learn a new language and it's going to be NIM. And the other thing is to set some kind of goal for yourself. In my case, I have actual use case for it. So I'm gonna describe it from top to bottom. So for a long time, I wanted to make some kind of like a web application that could also be on mobile, some kind of app that allows me to take various documents and just categorize them. In my case, I'm mostly concerned about being able to keep track of, the tax documents, medical records, all this stuff. So basically, I need to manage different PDFs and I know maybe JPEGs if I need to take a picture of something, or whatever the format of the document is. I need to be able to manage those, categorize them, maybe tag them, maybe add some dates to them so that I'm reminded, hi, you can throw that receipt out because your warranty is over or something. And on top of that, the thing is that some of those records, like your tax records or medical records, you just need to keep as a physical file, at least for some time until it's not needed anymore. So I need to have physical files and digital files, both categorized in, let's say, the same categories. And that's what I need for that application. And my goal is to deploy it, on my Nomad cluster. And Nomad is like Kubernetes, but from HashiCorp. And basically, my initial problem with it was that, hey, how am I going to manage those digital files? Because, with physical ones, I actually need to go and touch them, move them around physically. So that's going to be manual. But with those files, I want them to be safe. Therefore, I always need to have a backup of them. In my case, at the very moment, it's I have a copy on Google Doc that's being synchronized with my NAS, so I have it in 2 locations. So if something happens with Google Docs, I don't know, they just disappear. I have my physical copy. My copy at my home. If something happens to my NAS, I need to wipe everything. I still have a copy on Google Drive. And I want to keep that system intact. And the thing with solutions like Kubernetes or Nomad is that they are composed of many nodes. Let me go to something like Excalidraw and maybe show it a little bit. So can I make it dark? Dark theme, please. Yes. So let's say that I have the Nomad cluster. Okay. Let's name it Nomad cluster. Can I make it larger? Yes. This is a little bit small. Okay. So when you have a Nomad cluster, it's basically, or Kubernetes or whatever, it's composed of multiple servers. In my simple case, let's say these are 3 servers. So let's just name them quickly. 1, 2, 3, and we have server 1, server 2, and we have server 3. So the thing about Kubernetes or Nomad is that those servers that build the cluster, they are designed to be in some way ephemeral, that nothing should happen if this one suddenly goes away. If this one goes away for a while, nothing happens because whatever was running on it will be moved here and here. It will be redistributed, and when it comes back, it can be put back. There's nothing stopping me from adding some new servers to it and go 5, 7, 9 servers. And all the applications running on them will be redistributed. But in my case, if I have my application running on server 3, okay, let's call it docs manager, okay? If I have it running here, that means that all the files for that it manages are here as well. If this server goes away, this will be moved to, I don't know, server 2, for example, or server 1, I don't know. And suddenly all the files that were managed with it aren't there because this is just a Docker container that was, spun up and like, hey, here's your configuration. You should be working. So, that's the first problem. Like, I'm managing files. So then I'm thinking, in theory, you can force it to run on one server. And then when it goes down, oh well, service is down. So that's one option. The other option is like, hey, maybe I can have something outside of my server. And I don't know, let's call this NAS. But this is my NAS. And on my NAS, I will just run, I know, S3 bucket service, some service that provides me that. And then my docs manager can connect to it and get data from there. So at that point, if this goes down, your service, can handle it by responding like, hey, your data is unavailable at this moment and whatnot. We can handle it. So I tried in my case to start up S3 or whatever on my NAS, but it's not the most compatible solution. Then is the case of, okay, now you need to have support for that protocol in your programming language and whatnot. There's a lot of that. So I figured like, hey, maybe I'll make my own file management server or something. And I actually came up with a name. I'll call it File API. So the idea is to basically, hey, for the docs manager to be able to manage documents, I'll make some kind of file API, which is a small web service that can basically serve files over HTTPS. Additionally, you can upload files to it. You can browse through directories. You can, I don't know, move, copy, delete. All those basic operations that you can do on your normal file system, you'll be able to basically do by sending HTTP requests. So not a complicated concept, just something simple. And I actually started working on actual implementation on it. Let me search for it quickly. This is basically it. It's on my GitHub, File API. And I actually got some decent amount of pull requests for it on last Oktoberfest. And this is a simple application at that point written in using Bun, because I was like, hey, let's try out Bun. Maybe it'll be faster or smaller than Node.js. And yes, it was. The problem is that it was right before Bun 1.0 was released. And after that, lots of incompatibilities, like, files didn't work, tests didn't work. Basically, lots of problems. So then I went on a search for the programming language that I mentioned before. And I actually started rewriting in Go very recently. And yeah, I got to some place, but at that point I started not liking it because I'm used to be able to architect things a little bit, and just Go wouldn't let me do that. I need to keep things a little bit too simple, not as simple, too simple for my liking. So the idea is to get that file API and write it in NIM. What better way to learn a language than actually try to write something in it? So now, as I'm thinking, I did some search with NIM language. If we'll go back to NIM language, if we'll go to documentation, you'll see that they have, where is it? They have Nimble package directory. It's like, like your npm or NuGet packages. And there's not a lot here yet. It's a small language for now, with small community. But if we'll look for, let me start maybe again. This will be, file API will be mostly managing files. So if we'll go to documentation and, for example, go to the standard library, we should be able to easily find, things to work with files and whatnot. And that's all here. It's pretty easy to use with, can I search for file system or something? I'm sure it was something. Files. For example, files handling. It's all here. Moving a file, checking if it exists, removing. Other modules have, remove directory inside the, there's directories, standard package. It's all here. But the thing is that I want this file API service to be really reliable, and therefore I need to be able to test it properly. And for testing, those tests would need to keep creating images, keep creating files, removing them, moving, doing a lot of operations, and that would make those tests really, really slow. And the other thing is that sometimes those file operations, even though they are, you wait for them to finish and whatnot, sometimes operating system might just pretend that the file isn't there, even though you finished creating it, because, your tests are running so fast that even if you save the file, closed it, and start another test where you're checking if that file doesn't exist, it shows it still exists. So you will need to add delays to your tests. Suddenly you can't run them in parallel because they might be conflicting. You will need to have each test in a different directory. And it just becomes really, 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 it's not fun. So, for example, if I will be using Node.js, I could use a in-memory file system. And you could do the same in Go, because there are packages that basically allow you to use a memory file system that pretends to be a file system. It stores stuff in memory. Therefore, you can have multiple separate file systems for each server, or for each test, you can have separate file system. And therefore, your tests will be really fast. Won't be wearing out your disk. Even SSDs wear out, so, that why have additional cost? And you won't have conflicts that, wait, this folder is used by different tests or something. Every test is completely from scratch, and you don't have to wait for things to, being deleted, etc., basically cleaning up after your tests. You just remove that file system. You're done. And when it comes to NIM, unfortunately, while you search for a file or memory or something like that, I searched and I couldn't find anything that would provide that functionality of in-memory file system. Especially from the perspective of tests, where I want to have basically be able to create me file system, like a real one, or create me one in memory, and I want to be able to operate on both, call exactly the same method on both, so my tests can run the same code as normal application would do. So I can test those methods, just instead of passing it real file system, I pass it the in-memory file system. So that leads me to the situation where I basically need to create a separate library for nim or package, system of libraries. Yeah, they call them libraries. So I will need to create a library that basically is an abstraction of how you work with files. And that library would allow to create like little extension libraries, one for real file system, one for in-memory, and nothing stopping somebody to create another extension to that library that allows to, I don't know, manage S3 files on S3 buckets, just as if you were working with normal files. And therefore your application, you can write an application that can, manage files no matter where they are. And I thought that could be a useful addition to the nim community, if of course I will succeed. So yeah, the goal is to, maybe I'll write it down. Go learn nim by creating a file system abstraction package with real file system and in memory file system support. So that's the initial goal, to create that. Then create file API using nim. So basically the first step would be, hey, while we're learning nim, we can try to make that little library. And as we create that little library, which should be relatively simple, this should give us enough experience with the basics of the language, how to handle async stuff, how to iterate over things, how to maybe handle streams and things of that sort. And that should leave us to the point where we can go and actually try to write a web application that is using our library. So yeah, that's basically the goal. And for today, I thought that, after I presented basically the goal of what I want to do with this series, that's why I basically started my first ever stream, is just to share my journey through learning nim and going through creating those libraries. And as there is a lot of content on nim, I figured, hey, why not? Maybe somebody will be able to use it. I will, after I finish each stream, I'll also post it on YouTube. So later I'll add links to that. And yeah, that's basically what I would like to do. And you can join me in that journey.